Flip That Script. That's where the guest gets to ask the host a question. I don't know what you're going to ask.
This is a tough one.
Always makes me laugh. I love it. So listen, here we are for Flip That Script. Now, what is that for those of you who don't know? This is a scenario where I have great guests, and I'm always asking the questions. But I want them to ask me the questions. So we're going to flip that script, but I got to pick one of them. And Gene Rossi, you've been doing it for a long time. You were my first, and I'm choosing Magic Ball says, Mike Koribanics, flip that script.
Well, I'm honored. Bob, actually, since we have this panel, I think this is an interesting question I'm really interested in is you were head of law enforcement. So you when you were the prosecutor, you took care of all the municipalities. We have the chief on today as well. Can you talk a little bit about what the tension exists when you're really the leader of a team and one of your players go bad, and now you're actually flipping the script because now the people you are part of your team, you now have to prosecute and investigate. Could you just expound on that a little bit?
That's a great question, and I may flip it back to you, Chief, on that, and thank you for asking that, Mike. Very insightful. As the chief law enforcement officer, as the prosecutor, you have to recognize that while you're in charge of each of the individual police departments within your jurisdiction, you're not a cop, okay? And people may not realize this, but in our system of government, there's always a civilian authority that is over law enforcement, and typically in most instances it's the attorney. So as the chief law enforcement officer, I tried to keep that in mind. I keep it that I'm a lawyer, I prosecute cases, I have management responsibilities over the police, and I'm going to make sure they toe the line, they do the right thing. Here's the hardest thing, and Chief, maybe I'll throw it to you. We did a lot of internal affairs reforms in Morris County. I think we were on the cutting edge, and that's why I went up on the Attorney General's task force. But what I had to do, and Chief, I know you were great, and not every department was the same, was try to explain that by having effective and aggressive internal affairs practices, that this stops this Van Dyke kind of case and cases like this, that there's nothing in opposite. In other words, it is consistent to have good internal affairs practices and good policing to protect the community. But yes, like for example, when I was investigating the case up there in Denville with the chief, I was cognizant of the fact that we had a great working relationship with the community. I took the investigation away from him, no disrespect, that was what I was supposed to do. We were in his department taking his computers down and the MVRs and things of that nature, and I asked him, just calm down and let me do my job, as I did with the community that I outreach to. But I'm not going to lie to you, Mike, Wagner, Chief Wagner here was excellent to deal with. Not all chiefs felt that same way. And to your point, my last point before I throw it to you, Chief, is that we also have to work together in solving homicide cases and drug dealing and gang members, so it can get sticky. How did you feel about that, Chief? We worked a lot of cases together, a lot of murder cases, and we worked that police shooting. What was it like for you? Be honest.
So, you know, it's and I'll be absolutely honest with you, but let me start with it's about the basics of relationships and trust and understanding, right? So we have a very responsible, grown-up job to do as police officers, and especially as a chief of police, and I have similar responsibilities as you. But I have to also be trusting and understanding of our relationship and the responsible jobs you have to do. And when a police officer is involved in something like deadly use of force, quite honestly, I want to make sure that I've got a good, positive relationship with the person who's in charge of the prosecution of that case. And I want to be cooperative, and I want to be participatory, and I want to do everything I can to make sure that my police officers successfully navigate that water. And it is strange because we're so used to, as the chief of police, me being the person in charge of that, and for you to come in and I remember clearly that morning you coming up to the crime scene and saying, listen, you got to get out. Like, you've got to be out behind the other side of the yellow tape because there's already defense attorneys that were sniffing around, there were people taking pictures, and it wasn't going to look good for someone from the police department to be inside. And that's an uncomfortable place to be. But if you can take a breath and swallow and say, but although uncomfortable, it's the right place to be so that this can be clean and it can be safe for our community and the victim and the defendant police officer, it's the right place to be. You know, I felt, Bob, when you were our prosecutor, that you were helping us from both sides. You wanted us to be successful as law enforcement officers. You wanted us to win in court. And so you brought it from your defense side to the prosecution side to say, listen, these are where the things are going to go south, and you helped us by training us to get better so that we didn't make the same mistakes twice.
Yeah,
so it's definitely weird. It's strange.
Yeah, and you know, I remember, Chief, when we were out at that scene, I let you know, without telling you investigative data, that the first place I was going when I left that crime scene was to meet our community leaders that we had already established. I think this is a big point to bring out. A huge relationship with the African-American community, Hispanic community, and they were all in my office at 2 o'clock that afternoon, and I asked them the same thing that I asked you. Give me my time to dot my I's, cross my T's, do a proper investigation. If the cop was wrong, they will be indicted. If they're not wrong, they won't be. And you know what? We didn't have any blowback on either side, cops or the community. And I know that some cops were maybe a little agitated that we had such community outreach in some other departments.
Right. So, I mean, when you said that to me, it was one of the first conversations you had. I was a little frustrated at first. I understood what you wanted to do. And then later on that day, when I knew that things went so well with the community groups, that I understood exactly what you were trying to do. And again, it was for good that you were doing that. You were trying to help the situation, to tamp things down so that we didn't wind up in a situation like Ferguson. We could have had that on Franklin Road and Route 46 in Denver. We could have had, you know, riots and people really going crazy. So again, it's about trust, relationships, and understanding. You have to understand that there's different parts of these cases, and you've got to let the people in charge do their job. I stayed back, and I cared for my department and its members and my police officer and their families, and you were super communicative with me where you could be. You let me know where things were going and what was going on.
Yeah.
And it was a good cooperative relationship.
And listen, it is a delicate balance, Mike. That was a great question, and I think that people don't realize that the distinctions between what prosecutors do, what police do, you work together on most instances, but there are times where you have to lay a hammer down, and it may not necessarily be appreciated. Thank you so much. That'll be the end of the segment on Flip That Script. We're going to go to a break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.